The idea for My First Suit came from Stewart, and it was actually a story he told me. And I thought it seemed a kind of wonderful subject for a short film, really, the kind of relationship between a mother and a son, and the whole kind of rite of the first suit, which is such a big kind of identity thing, you know, with the push and pull about what you really want and what the parent wants and things like that. Basically, we did Jules, Darl and My First Suit at the same time. It was part of the same series, and they were both conscious attempts to kind of break a taboo that had been in New Zealand filmmaking, which was that you didn't really ever show stories from a point of view of gay characters at all. So both of them were a conscious effort to kind of break this kind of, you know, drought, really, and be very kind of emphatic about that. So they were both breaking through, really, with all that meant, I think, in terms of uncertainty and bravura, I think, too. I actually read the short story by Anne Kennedy of Jules Darl. It was in The Listener, and I was searching for a film for this series, and I thought, my God, this is it. And I know this will outrage people. So it seemed the perfect kind of choice, really, at that time, to kind of produce something provocative and also at the same time a kind of meaningful film that also looked incredible. When I came across Georgina, it was a kind of like wonderful discovery that here was someone who fitted the role perfectly and had had experience in acting, which is not a small thing, you know, when you're a novice director and, you know, your first kind of big piece of drama, and you come across someone who has been working in television and is very professional. I mean, Georgie has always been incredibly professional, you know, as an MP or, you know, in every level. At that time, the Salvation Army were collecting signatures against homosexual law reform, very controversially. And we were doing some filming, and I remember we waited in Queen Street for the Salvation Army to march down Queen Street. And then we got Georgie and the other character in the film to run out in front of this parade and walk along in front of it, and we filmed it and put it in the film. And if you look at the film today, there are a lot of little hints all the way through which spoke to people at that time. Well, we had a huge problem with television in New Zealand. It was it was a kind of wonderful period where you made things on film, so they actually had a life in the cinema. And also they went to television. But when it was shown to this sort of bureaucrat within TVNZ, he refused to show it. And the whole series was held up for, I don't know, 1.5 years, because he said it was unacceptable to show transgendered people not as figures of fun. You know, so that they had to be laughed at, but you couldn't actually kind of produce a drama where you empathised. So it was a very kind of controversial piece of drama. It was made in a kind of psychic roar of hysteria about AIDS at that time. And I'd had the kind of personal experience of a friend who had HIV and became very sick, being looked after by a group of friends in a house in Grey Lynn. And it sort of changed it scaled this sort of paranoia, which was global, down into a kind of simple acts of kindness, I suppose, human kindness within a house. And I thought it was a message in a way people needed to hear. And the drama really came out of that and really had an extraordinary global sort of presence for a while, because I think it was just so unusual to send out that message at that time, you know, where people were so uncertain about what it was and what could you do, and you know, how contaminating was it, because of so much hysteria focused on that. We tried to make it documentary-ish, I suppose, really. I mean, and you know, the actors were tremendously committed and things. It was pretty incredible as an experience, I think. When I was younger, I seemed to have a huge amount of energy, which I don't have to quite the same degree now. But one of my things was to try and save kind of at-risk architecture. And at that stage, believe it or not, the Civic really faced sort of demolition by neglect. And I wanted to gather together the stories, one of which, of course, was about Frida Stark, and it was one of the main kind of inspirations for me to go ahead with the film, was this sort of feeling I must get Frida Stark on film. You know, I must kind of preserve her presence on film. In terms of filmmaking, it was a great period of sort of queer filmmaking in the world, really, with people like Fassbinder and Derek Jarman. Being kind of leading queer filmmakers and sort of completely out in every way, and doing kind of highly stylized, very visual, beautifully coloured, often films. So it seemed to lend, the Mighty Civic seemed to lend itself to that kind of drenched in colour, kind of, you know, high camp in a way, sort of visual. Desperate Remedies was our kind of leap into making a feature film, which had been delayed after a death in the family for quite a long time. And Desperate Remedies was this sort of highly romantic period drama, which we had trouble raising money for. And in the end, it came down to this sort of solution that we would shoot the whole film in a studio. It wasn't written to be within a studio, and in a way that constraint we worked it to our advantage, in that we made everything as theatrical as possible, and everything was sort of madly high, sort of toned and everything like that, and you could light everything so it looked beautiful. And you know, it was shot by Leon Narby, who's such a master of lighting and things like that. And you know, and then we had it introduced, it had Kevin Smith in, of course, as a sort of luscious male actor, and it was a great sort of escapade, really, to direct it. Desperate Remedies introduced Cliff Curtis to kind of feature films, really. And it was such a fabulous introduction because he's so kind of Byronic and handsome and wicked, and you know, it was a very, very powerful debut. We had to persuade the Film Commission that Lisa Chappell was a sort of suitable person to be a lead character because she'd been in Gloss, and they thought she didn't have a kind of an emotional reach. And yet the minute we saw the rushes of her, the camera absolutely loves her. You know, she's just got one of those sort of X-factor presences that the film just sort of lights up. That was just one example. It's all these sort of silly little pin-pricking things that you have to engage with and treat seriously. Annie Goldson, who I knew well and was a friend, came to me with the idea and said, would I like to co-direct with this documentary? And because I'd had such a long career in a way of co-directing, I knew it would work. And the whole documentary was based on a very, very long interview I did with Georgina, where we just sat down and we had this incredibly long conversation, personal, gradually and increasingly deeply personal, till we ended up with me talking to her about the division between a public self and a private self, and how much her public self had almost reached such a point that it had occupied all the space of her private self, so she couldn't have a kind of love life or a personal life, which I think is one of the poignant moments of truth in that documentary. And I think that was it was because I knew her so well and over such a long time that we could go that far, I think, with it. And in a way, it is a record of an amazing kind of moment in someone's life. My viewpoint about the whole thing's changed over time. When I left the film world, I began to doubt whether the whole kind of queer filmmaking thing had a future, and I began to wonder whether it was just a time-based thing. But as I've gone on, I've begun to realise that it has gone on enormously and will always go on. And in fact, sort of queer filmmaking has sort of embedded itself on the structure much more powerfully now, so that, you know, you have all those American series like Glee and things like that that are produced by, you know, out gay people, and that have kind of, you know, gayness as a kind of central aspect, as well as kind of adventurous queer filmmakers still existing and still pushing the envelope.